right, so for our part two, probably not a big surprise, but I'll show you. You want to take the files that you had for that part one, create a new folder at that same project level, part two, and then copy those into there. Okay, keeping them in step one or part one because I do want to see them. I look at the progression over time. This time, create a CSS subdirectory, and in there, generally style CSS is a good idea. I think last time I may have said main as well, so that's fine. One of those two. And then keeping your images at that same level so that we don't have to copy them as we move through. Okay? So once you get that done, right, and here's the deal, and fix any issues you had with part one, and then do setup done. Okay, so making sure you're following up with me, like let's say you had some semantic, you had some untitled, like here's my output for this one, right? If I'd had something in here that was untitled, you definitely want to fix that. If you had any issues with the way you had done your images, you had some links that weren't working, you want to fix all that, okay, before you start in here, right? So make sure you get that done. So now this is going to be a little different in the way I'm going to do commits. I'll talk about that in a minute. So here's the overview of what you're going to do. You're going to start to style our pages, and here are the requirements, and you can see how many points this weighs. So using only what you've learned in chapter 1 through 13. So let's actually go review that, right? So we learned about selectors, we learned about colors, units and sizes, we learned about the box model, typography, styling links, list stylings. Okay, we did a little mini project. We learned about display and floats and columns and positions. So using what we've learned here, right, style everything on your page. Now, in this case, I want you to use a combination of element level stylings and classes, and you can use ID levels as well. I'll talk about divs in a minute, right? But you definitely, part of this is doing this in the way the best practices we have learned, right? So your CSS needs to show you understand the cascade, and the way you understand the cascade is both the way you position your CSS in the file, and then using both element level where it makes sense and class level where that makes sense. Okay, so doing a combination and doing best practices here, right? So anyway, I'll go through this and I'll kind of highlight some of the ways I did this, right? So now here's the thing, and this is the part where, you probably have a certain idea in your head. Like it doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to implement what, you need to show how well you can apply what you've learned. And don't use flex, box, and grid yet. We'll do that later, right? Points will be removed there. Do not use CSS libraries and write your own CSS. Okay, so yeah, that's really, really important. Write your own CSS. Now, I'll talk about documentation in a minute. And then on the site.h, if you did sitemap, that's fine, site.html. Select your color palette and then show that on the page. Right? And then limit, if not totally don't do any divs. And I know for those of you that have done past HTML, CSS, divs are just something that sometimes it's like I don't know what else to do. But part of that is I really want you to stay away from it as much as possible. Anything more than a couple, right, I will dock points for that, right? So at this point, right, now we start talking, and I haven't given you a commit for this part because now I want to actually talk about commits. But before I do, I just want to show you like my step, my part two. So you can see that I created kind of a, that idea of the hero image. And I did that in various element level stylings. I still had my menu in there. I ended up doing some of that hover over to show my menu. You can see I have a border here. I did use the floats in order to make my images and my text kind of play well together. I did style my list. I styled my headings, right? I did have my links here. Make sure those external links are opening up in new tabs. And then I did have a copyright, and then I did the sitemap. Now on the sitemap, oh, hold on. Okay, sorry about that. I had opened a different folder. So I ended up doing, inline boxes here for mine. You can do these, however, just make sure you show us. And again, do write some CSS for this, right? You're going to want to show us your color palette, right? All right, so make sure all your links work. And make sure you're, if you do change some of your content, make sure you're reflecting that. Make sure you haven't broken that part of it. Okay, so again, there's a lot there that you need to go through, right? Using the display, which is kind of what I did up in my menu, and also what I did in my palette. I use floats, I use columns a little bit, and then I use some positioning, right? So again, what you're going to do here is style this. Now, before you start, because this is just an overview, I want to tell you how I'm going to look at this as far as commits, okay? So commits and documentation will be the way I grade this work, right? So yes, all this has to be applied, but the way I look at it as far as, yes, they have to be there, is I'm going to, your commits are important, right? Commits show your progress in writing CSS. For example, once you feel you've achieved a specific style for something on your page, then maybe you commit that, okay? Now, documentation, as I said on our run project, is really important. Every rule set needs to have documentation on it, okay? Showing comments in your CSS for how your rule set is used in your page design. Okay, so, and then use short commit messages that tell me about the work, like maybe, and I'm just giving you examples here, right? So starting body rule set, right? Finishing banner class, because you want, as I said before, to use a combination of element level, class level, and again, you could use ID if that is something as well. Now, the more commits show progress and process, okay? So what you want to do here is, as you're thinking about this, as you're working on it, right? And not that you may complete a style and then you would come back later and refine it. That's okay. But really what I'm looking at here is, instead of having specific, like you have to do these commits, I just want you to know this is how I'm grading, because I look at your commits and it shows me your progress. I look at your documentation to make sure you write comments that tell me you understand the rule sets that you've used in your code. Okay? Now, this is another one where, commit early to get feedback, right? Use that same image structure I talked about before. If you need help, reach out to myself or Zach. Make sure you have valid HTML and CSS, and then commit your history, commit history for folder 2. Okay, so I was trying to think of anything else I was going to show you here. Oh, by the way, on my particular one, the way, and you do want to always wrap, as I said before, your images in figure and do fig caption. I ended up using that trick that Dave talked about to get my fig captions working correctly on that. His trick definitely worked in that case. I think I ended up doing possibly a little more research to get it done. You definitely want to have a footer, right? Having that styled as well is really helpful. So remember, again, it's not that, and we get very hung up on the way we think things should look. At this stage, what you want to do is just learn how to apply what we have learned in these first 13 chapters. Okay? All right, so I look forward to seeing you work. I hope this was helpful. Reach out if you need help.